Courtrooms are meant to be havens of order and decorum, yet you'd be astonished at how frequently chaos erupts within their walls. One defendant spiraled into such madness that he turned on his attorney. Some saved their rage for the judge, but if you thought that was extreme, brace yourself for the story of a criminal who went into full beast mode and physically attacked the judge in front of the entire courtroom. In this episode, we'll explore shocking moments of the youngest criminals who went crazy in the courtroom. Juan Rodriguez. A heated exchange took place in a South Florida courtroom when Juan Rodriguez, accused of attempted murder, made threatening remarks towards Circuit Court Judge Beatrice Buchko. Rodriguez was facing charges for allegedly stabbing Nadine Morris, a nurse's assistant, at an assisted living facility in North Miami. During the hearing, Rodriguez requested to be released from jail, citing his Jewish faith and a skin rash. However, Judge Buchko denied his request, prompting Rodriguez to become agitated and hostile. He explicitly threatened the judge, stating that he would put an end to her life if she failed to release him from custody. Rodriguez repeated the threat and escalated the situation by asking for Judge Buchko's phone number. In response to his alarming behavior, the court ordered Rodriguez to be held without bond on the first-degree attempted murder charge. Randall Moore.
Unbelievable comments from a convicted murderer, unprecedented words from the judge.
In a courtroom that demanded justice, Randall Moore's cold, calculating words spoke volumes about the darkness within him, showing no regret for the lives he had destroyed. Moore was convicted of the brutal murder of his estranged wife, Ann Lynch Moore, and the attempted murder of a police officer. Throughout the trial, and even during his sentencing in the courtroom, Moore showed no remorse for his heinous actions. When allowed to speak, he seemed more intent on justifying his violent behavior rather than expressing any sense of guilt or sorrow. He coldly blamed his actions on being denied the chance to see his child, as if that could justify taking a life. He coldly declared that he felt no remorse for Tran's death, insisting that it could have been avoided if he had been granted access to his child.
That has got to be the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm not saying what I did was any better.
He went on to claim, with chilling indifference, that as a consequence, Tran would never have the chance to see her again. Moore's disregard for human life extended beyond just his wife. When Ann's mother, Sheila Lynch, delivered her victim impact statement, Moore disrupted the court with cruel and degrading remarks. He shouted that Theron had hated her mother, calling Sheila a loser, and taunting her to read her daughter's journals to confirm it. His words were filled with venom as he described his daughter, Tran Marie Lynch, as evil, hateful, and despicable.
My daughter, Tresanne Marie Lynch, was evil, hateful, and despicable.
For his crimes, Moore was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences for the murder of his wife, with an additional 25 years added for the attempted murder of Officer Todd Rowland. Judge Joel Novak, reacting to Moore's statements, remarked that Moore's outburst served a purpose. Novak described Moore as a coward who preyed on women and noted that Moore's actions had given a new, terrifying definition to the word evil.
You give a new meaning to the word evil. I've never, ever seen anybody like you.
In his 31 years on the bench, Judge Novak stated that he had never encountered someone as despicable as Moore, and he hoped he would never have to again. Keith Allen Ferguson.
You understand me? I'm not doing this for these stupid cameras and these inbreds.
In a dramatic courtroom reversal, Keith Ferguson stunned observers by pleading guilty to first and second-degree murder. This move would ultimately seal his fate and earn him a life sentence without parole. On November 18, 2014, Ferguson's life left a trail of terror and destruction. In a shocking and brutal act, Ferguson shot and killed his wife, Tiffany, in front of their 4 children, but that was only the beginning. Ferguson's descent into madness was just getting started. He put on body armor, gathered his arsenal, and took his children to his father-in-law's house, where he committed another heinous murder.
Keith Ferguson admitted to killing his estranged wife, Tiffany Ferguson, and father-in-law, James Weber.
Ferguson claimed he was supposed to go somewhere else but ended up at an unrelated house on Golden Road, where he held a 59-year-old woman hostage for 7 hours. It raised a lot of questions. Was he a calculated killer, or just someone who snapped? His terror spree ended when he gave up and turned himself in, facing a long list of charges, including homicide, home invasion, kidnapping, and explosives possession.
We have two murders We have issues of flight, home invasion, kidnapping.
In court, he pleaded guilty to first and second-degree murder and got a life sentence without the possibility of parole. As the judge handed down the sentence, he couldn't help but note that Ferguson's actions were a clear indication of something fundamentally wrong with him. While Ferguson may not have met the clinical definition of insanity, his actions were undoubtedly those of a disturbed individual. As Ferguson stood calm and collected, agreeing that it was best for him to stay away from his children, one couldn't help but wonder what drove him to commit such atrocities. Deobra Redden. What was meant to be a routine sentencing hearing turned into chaos when Deobra Redden, in a shocking outburst, leaped over the bench and tackled the judge.
In accordance with the laws of the state of Nevada, this court...
On January 3, 2024, a courtroom in Las Vegas became the scene of an unimaginable and violent attack. 30-year-old Deobra Redden, who had previously pleaded guilty to attempted battery, was facing the possibility of prison time. His fate was in the hands of District Judge Mary Huss. Redden, however, wasn't ready to accept the consequences. In a desperate attempt to avoid incarceration, he requested probation, citing his newfound job and plans to further his education. Redden argued that he felt he was in a better place mentally. His voice trembled as he spoke about his support system and his recent job as a Teamster. He added that he didn't deserve to go to prison a second time, claiming that he had changed.
I'm just being me, going to school, growing up, trying to do the right things. I never get tired of trying to do the right things.
But Judge Huss stood firm, her decision unshaken. Then, without warning, Redden's fury erupted. With a barrage of insults, he vaulted over the bench, his body crashing into Judge Huss, sending her to the floor. The courtroom was thrown into chaos as shocked bystanders rushed to intervene. Redden fought with wild determination, his fists flying, while others struggled to hold him back. This terrifying moment was captured on camera, a scene that quickly spread across the news and social media.
He made headlines for attacking a judge just as she was about to pronounce sentence.
The footage showed Redden leaping over the bench in an unexpected, almost animalistic fury. Judge Huss, visibly stunned, stood after the attack, rubbing her head, clearly shaken but not seriously hurt. Medical personnel arrived to assess her, as well as a court-martial and the judge's law clerk, both of whom had been injured in the struggle. Redden's dark past soon emerged from the shadows. A man of many crimes, his record was marred by domestic violence, robberies, and attempted home invasions.
That man is now behind bars, facing over a dozen charges, including extortion.
Once imprisoned for domestic battery, he had only recently stepped out on parole in 2022. His courtroom eruption was a startling display. Yet, the chaos he had unleashed was only a prelude to what was still to come. In his subsequent court appearance, Redden was escorted in by at least 4 officers, his hands cuffed tightly. His attorney, Carl Arnold, made a startling argument that Redden should be found not guilty due to his insanity. He claimed he had been in a delusional state during the attack, unaware of what he was doing. To support this claim, Redden's foster mother, Karen Springer, took the stand. Revealing a harrowing truth, Redden had struggled with severe mental health issues since he was a child, living with paranoid schizophrenia.
Karen Springer says that in the end, she was heartbroken to see her son charging at the judge.
Springer had cared for Redden since he was 12 years old, witnessing firsthand the dark side of her mental illness. The attack on Judge Huss sparked a larger conversation about courtroom safety and the vulnerability of judges. Many called for heightened security measures to protect those who preside over such high-stakes trials. In the end, Redden was sentenced to 19 to 48 months in prison for the assault on Judge Huss. However, in a twist of fate, the sentencing for the attack would be handed down by another judge, as the system now had to grapple with the delicate balance between mental illness and criminal accountability. Ricky Brown. The hostage crisis at the South Carolina Vocational Rehabilitation Center unleashed a wave of chaos, but it was in the courtroom where Ricky Bernard Brown's threatening outbursts deepened the darkness of his already violent past.
Should've been on the front line, I should've shot you.
On the fateful day of October 2, 2019, Ricky Bernard Brown orchestrated a hostage crisis at the South Carolina Vocational Rehabilitation Center in Newberry. Armed with a handgun, he fired a shot into the ceiling, marking the escalation of a dire and terrifying standoff.
This vocational rehabilitation center here in Newberry, there were 5 employees held at gunpoint by a suspect.
As law enforcement converged on the scene, 2 of the hostages seized the opportunity to flee through a back door, followed shortly by 2 others who made their escape with remarkable luck. After an hour of tense negotiations, Brown ultimately released the final hostage.
A hostage situation is now over after police say a man took 5 hostages at gunpoint.
Yet this was not the end of the turmoil. As the SWAT team stormed the building, Brown fired several more shots before surrendering to authorities. By some stroke of fortune, no lives were lost during this harrowing ordeal.
Thankfully, no hostage was hurt. They all got out, and that man was taken into custody.
A man with a storied and dark past, Brown had long been acquainted with the law. His criminal history was both extensive and severe, including a conviction for involuntary manslaughter in 1997, for which he had served a lengthy sentence of 20 years in prison. Released from community supervision in May of 2018, Brown's path to destruction continued. In April of 2019, he had been a suspect in an attempted murder case in Newberry, though the charges were ultimately dropped due to a lack of conclusive evidence. Following the chaos of the hostage situation, Brown was charged with a litany of serious offenses, including kidnapping, unlawful possession of firearms, carrying a weapon during a violent crime, discharging a weapon within city limits, and resisting arrest with a weapon. During the tense confrontation, he spoke of his mental health struggles, claiming that his pleas for help had gone unanswered.
He told a judge this morning that he needs mental health help, and he's been trying to get his medicine.
He revealed that he had sought mental health support on 3 occasions, but had yet to receive the treatment or medication he so desperately needed. In a particularly disturbing courtroom moment during his bond hearing, Brown made a menacing remark toward an officer, saying that the officer should have been shot in the face. This statement led to an additional charge for threatening a public official, a charge that, although the exact outcome remains unclear, was taken as a credible and dangerous threat against law enforcement. Ultimately, the weight of his violent history and the gravity of his actions on that fateful day led to Brown's irrevocable fate. Under South Carolina's 2-strike law, which mandates life sentences for those convicted of a second serious crime, Brown was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Isaiah Gardenhire. The courtroom went quiet as Isaiah Gardenhire's words lingered in the air, challenging the judge. The judge responded, and his reply would ultimately determine Gardenhire's fate. Gardenhire unleashed a maelstrom of terror upon the unsuspecting citizens of Michigan, leaving a trail of death, destruction, and unutterable suffering.
Sexually assaulting his girlfriend, then stabbing and killing her 13-year-old daughter.
On June 6, 2021, Gardenhire embarked upon a 45-hour odyssey of violence, during which he committed acts of unutterable cruelty and savagery. His first victim was 13-year-old Audrey Dembowski, whom he brutally murdered in a senseless act of violence. This heinous crime was merely the prelude to a litany of atrocities, as Gardenhire proceeded to sexually assault multiple women, leaving them traumatized and shattered. Gardenhire's demeanor during his arraignment was an obvious proof of his unmitigated evil. He sneered and jeered, making obscene gestures and disrupting the proceedings with his belligerent behavior. His lack of remorse was palpable, as he callously admitted to charges of second-degree murder, unlawful imprisonment, and assault with a deadly weapon. This unrepentant murderer seemed utterly devoid of empathy or compassion, his actions driven solely by a malevolent desire to inflict harm and suffering upon others. In a rare display of judicial candor, Judge Mark Duthie, a veteran jurist with 37 years of experience, described Gardenhire's case as the worst he had ever encountered. The sentence meted out to this unrepentant murderer was fittingly severe, 75 to 120 years in prison. Furthermore, Gardenhire was also convicted of murdering a young couple, Harley Owens and Kelsey Kuhn Lennon, and received an additional sentence of 50 to 125 years, to be served concurrently. Michael Gaines. In a moment that would be forever remembered in legal history, Michael, a Kansas native living with HIV, unleashed a torrent of hateful words and profanities at the courtroom.
February 15th, that rogue-ass Diaz beat the man, fractured his jaw, put him in the hospital on life support.
Found guilty of assaulting law enforcement officers by spitting on 2 deputies at the Sedgwick County Jail, Michael seized the opportunity to address the court, only to indulge in a reprehensible display of aggression. As the evidence against him was presented, Michael vehemently denied the charges, his voice rising to a fevered pitch as he hurled insults and invective at the judge, Rebecca Pilshaw, and the deputy district attorney, Kevin O'Connor. His words dripped with malice and hatred, as he spat terrible insults, including the shocking declaration that his critics were maggots who deserved to die. The courtroom erupted into chaos as Michael's tirade reached a crescendo, prompting his removal from the premises. The aftermath of this tumultuous event saw Michael sentenced to 13 years in prison, a decision that sparked intense debate regarding the severity of the punishment. While some argued that the risk of transmitting HIV through saliva was negligible, others countered that the emotional distress inflicted upon the victims, including a deputy with a cut and another who was spat upon in the eye, justified the harsh sentence. Judge Pilshaw strongly defended her decision, using a powerful comparison. She likened Michael's actions to a robber waving an empty gun at a store clerk. Even though the actual danger may be low, the fear and trauma felt by the victim are very real. As the courtroom drama unfolded, it became evident that Michael's actions were motivated by a deep-seated malevolence, a toxic cocktail of anger, resentment, and contempt that ultimately led to his downfall. Kwahuru Govan. In a dramatic and chaotic courtroom scene, Kwahuru Govan's arraignment on murder charges quickly descended into pandemonium. 38-year-old Kwahuru Govan was dragged into the courtroom by more than a dozen police officers. As he was brought in, Govan loudly protested, claiming that he had a right to stand in court.
I have a right to stand. I have a right to stand in court. I have a right to stand in court.
However, the judge firmly responded that he did not. Govan was scheduled for arraignment on murder charges related to the 2005 beheadings of 19-year-old Rashawn Brazel, whose dismembered body parts were found in trash bags inside a Brooklyn subway tunnel. When asked to provide fingerprints, Govan refused. The judge stated that Govan was being remanded and added that he would see him the following day. However, Govan, who was seemingly frustrated and claiming he was being framed, interrupted, saying that he couldn't breathe. In addition to the murder charge for Brazel's death, Govan also faced charges for the dismemberment of 17-year-old Sharavia Thomas in 2004.
Police later found her naked body stuffed in laundry bags in a nearby alley.
His arrest in Florida for robbery led authorities to make the connection between him and the homicide. The detective on the case declined to confirm a match, but noted that Govan had been involved in crimes across the country, including in Florida and California, with plans to pursue any other cases that might align with his pattern. Despite Govan's outbursts in the courtroom, they did little to undermine the sense of closure that Brazel's mother had been waiting for over 12 long years. With tears in her eyes, she thanked the detectives, the agency, and the cold case unit for their relentless dedication to finding answers. The next steps were clear. Gavin would remain in court every day until he agreed to be fingerprinted and properly arraigned. Authorities are now considering the possibility that Gavin could be a serial killer, with plans to launch a full investigation and collaborate with agencies from other cities to uncover any other potential connections. Tyler Daisy. As Tyler Daisy's trial approached its heartbreaking end, a profoundly emotional confrontation with his sister exposed the terrifying decline of a young man consumed by madness, driving him to carry out an unfathomable tragedy. In January 2024, an unspeakable tragedy unfolded in the heart of Dubuque, Iowa. Tyler Daisy, a young man whose name would soon become synonymous with infamy, was accused of the savage murders of his mother, Jennifer Daisy, and their cherished family dog, Echo.
That's the verdict in the trial of a Dubuque man accused of killing his mother.
The courtroom became the stage for an extraordinary tale of madness, delusion, and a descent into the darkest recesses of the human psyche. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Tyler stood resolute in his defense during his trial, which began in the summer of 2024. His justification for the horrific killings was as perplexing as it was disturbing. He claimed that his mother had trapped him in a malevolent web of witchcraft, summoning a vengeful power that he believed he could no longer escape. This unhinged conviction drove him to the unthinkable, ending the lives of those he once loved. But his defiance was not limited to his actions. It permeated every corner of the courtroom. Tyler refused to participate in the trial, equating the judicial proceedings to the chains of slavery. In a scathing letter to the court, he declared that he sought neither justice nor redemption, but instead craved honor and spiritual communion. He believed that failure to act according to his convictions would bring disgrace upon his mother and ancestors, an affront to the very fabric of his being. Although Tyler's body was absent from the proceedings, his lawyer attempted to challenge the prosecution's case. Yet, The damning evidence spoke volumes. Crime scene photographs capturing the grotesque aftermath. And the weapon, a hatchet found within Tyler's own home. Bloodstains on the blade told a silent story, with Jennifer's blood and Tyler's palm print forever seared into the gruesome relic. The prosecution's case was airtight, yet Tyler's defiance remained unshaken. As the trial neared its grim conclusion, a heart-wrenching moment of truth came at the hands of Kylie, Tyler's sister. With sorrow and disbelief, she recounted the haunting transformation of her brother, the boy she once knew, now an unrecognizable figure consumed by madness. In an agonizing exchange, Kylie confronted her brother, only to be met with derision and cold laughter. Tyler taunted his sister's anguish, sneering coldly and speaking of warped notions of divine favor. He claimed he could live forever, asserting that he had God, while mocking her by asking where her God was.
I hope you enjoy life in prison.
I can live forever, I have God.
His words were a reflection of his alarming detachment from the gravity of his actions, as he seemed to embrace a twisted and misguided understanding of spiritual redemption. However, the court's decision was quick and resolute. Tyler would spend the rest of his life in prison. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. There have been disturbing reports of young killers, some as young as 8, committing heinous crimes, and even when caught and brought to court, they show no remorse. So, what do you think drives them? Is it mental instability, societal pressures, or something else entirely? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments. Shondell Jackson. The events that unfolded in the courtroom after Shondell Jackson's murder conviction exposed a troubling blend of cruelty, arrogance, and utter indifference to others' suffering. In the bitter cold of Milwaukee, in the year 2009, Shondell Jackson's name would be indelibly marked in the history of criminal notoriety. Convicted for the murder of Nathan Potter, a promising 21-year-old student, Jackson's crime sent ripples of shock through the city. Jackson, alongside his accomplice, Derek Thomas, embarked on a dark path of robbery, setting their sights on Potter, a young man who had only ventured out for a night of socializing at a local bar. Their plan was simple: to steal what they could from a vulnerable target. They followed Potter through the streets, cornered him, and demanded money, a demand that ended in senseless violence. When they discovered Potter had no money on him, Jackson's anger erupted, and without a second thought, he shot the young man down in cold blood. The life of Nathan Potter was taken in a moment of savage greed. The trial in court that followed would reveal the depth of Jackson's indifference to the life he had stolen. Throughout the proceedings, he exhibited no remorse, his expression cold and detached. In a shocking display of arrogance, he even smiled at the grieving Potter family, as if to mock their pain.
Making gestures toward the Potter family as though he enjoyed rubbing it in their faces.
At his sentencing, his behavior spiraled further into chaos. In a fit of rage, Jackson unleashed a torrent of curses at the judge, his anger spiraling out of control. The outburst escalated so violently that deputies had no choice but to subdue him with pepper spray. Even with the mounting evidence of his gruesome crime, Jackson's actions only seemed to solidify his guilt, leading to a life sentence without the possibility of parole.
A hope dashed by Judge Rebecca Dallett, who gave him life without parole.
A future locked away, devoid of freedom, seemed a fitting consequence for the life he had so recklessly destroyed. But the trial did not only involve Jackson. His family would also become a point of contention. As the Potter family struggled through the difficult process of seeking justice, Jackson's relatives exacerbated the situation with their venomous outbursts. They hurled insults and expressed their hatred toward the Potter family, repeatedly screaming, "I hate you," in a show of complete contempt. Their behavior only intensified the suffering of the grieving family and sparked widespread public condemnation. Yet amidst the chaos, there was one who stood apart from the madness: Jackson's uncle. The man who had made the courageous decision to turn his nephew into the authorities, recognizing the immense wrong Jackson had committed, now stood in quiet resolve. He expressed that he believed the sentence was just and demonstrated sound judgment. Baseweb. In a stunning act of disrespect, Baseweb spat at the judge, igniting a courtroom drama defined by defiance, turmoil, and, in the end, justice. In the peaceful town of Paris, Kentucky, an ominous tale begins to unfold as 30-year-old Bass Webb faces 2 charges of attempted murder.
Her ex-boyfriend, Bass Webb, was charged with her murder.
Surveillance footage from outside a Kentucky jail, taken just a week earlier, reveals the chilling moment when Webb, a former inmate, having served time for assault, deliberately accelerated his vehicle, attempting to mow down 2 jail employees. One man narrowly escaped, but the other was grievously pinned against the wall, suffering severe injuries. At his first court appearance before Judge Vanessa Dixon, Webb's contempt for the law only deepened. In a shocking act of defiance, he spat directly at the judge, marking a new low in his brazen criminal conduct. Even behind bars, Webb's violence continued to escalate. He and 4 other inmates incited a riot within the Fayette County Detention Center. When confronted by officers, Webb retaliated viciously, hurling a metal telephone box at one correctional officer. This reckless act led to his conviction for third-degree assault, for which he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. The attempt to murder the 2 jail employees added 37 years to his sentence, bringing the total to 52 years. But the darkness surrounding Webb was far from over. While incarcerated, he was implicated in the unsolved murder of an ex-girlfriend.
And next month, Bass Webb is scheduled to stand trial for the murder of a second former girlfriend.
In a plea agreement, he confessed to the murder, adding another 50 years to his sentence. Still, his reign of terror was far from finished. 5 years later, Webb returned to court, now charged with the murder of a different girlfriend, a cold case that had haunted authorities for nearly a decade. A tip from within the jail led to the grim discovery of her remains. As Webb entered the courtroom, his physical transformation was shocking. His head now bore grotesque tattoos, a hit list of judges, prosecutors, police, and media members, an unmistakable symbol of his deranged mentality. The horrifying details of his previous crime surfaced, how he had choked his girlfriend to death before burying her in a shallow grave. When the judge called him to stand, Webb remained seated, grinning eerily in response. After more than a week of proceedings, the jury rendered its verdict. Webb was found guilty of intentional murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Joseph Zeeler. As the evidence against him piled up, Joseph Zeeler's attitude shifted from defiance to desperation. In a riveting tale of hidden truths and justice, Zeeler was ultimately revealed as the culprit behind the horrific 1990 murders of 11-year-old Robin Cornell and her 32-year-old babysitter, Lisa Story, in Cape Coral, Florida.
Of 11-year-old Robin Cornell and 32-year-old Lisa Story is talking with NBC2.
For 26 long years, the case lingered as an unsolved enigma until 2016, when a startling breakthrough occurred. Zeeler's DNA was unmistakably connected to the crime scene after his arrest for assaulting his stepson. This critical revelation ultimately resulted in his indictment on 2 charges of first-degree murder. During the trial, Zeeler's former lover, Bonnie Nicely, boldly took the stand, revealing his fabrications regarding memory loss and his claims of inability to read or write, assertions he had made to authorities at the time of the murders. In a gripping twist, Zeeler attempted to sow confusion by claiming to have had an intimate affair with Robin's mother, Jan Cornell, before the tragic events, but then denied ever meeting her or the victims. Zeeler's erratic behavior escalated as he openly admitted to sending letters to the Cornell family, attempting to shift blame onto a relative of his, all while making rude gestures and shouting at the jury. But it was his actions during the sentencing that truly stunned the courtroom.
That was one of the few times 6-year-old Joseph Zeeler spoke in court Monday.
Handcuffed and flanked by detectives, Zeeler unexpectedly asked for a private conversation with his attorney. As his lawyer leaned in, Zeeler abruptly threw a wild elbow, catching everyone by surprise. Fortunately, the detective swiftly restrained him, bringing the courtroom back to order. Despite the outburst, Zeeler remained calm, claiming he was relaxed. His attorney, trying to lighten the tension, joked that he'd taken harder hits in his boxing days. The atmosphere was thick with tension as the court prepared to announce its verdict. In the end, the jury found Zeeler guilty and sentenced him to death for each of the victims. T.J. Lane. The trial exposed the dark depths of T.J. Lane's depravity, as his smug grin and blatant lack of remorse fueled the intense anger of the victims' families and the public. In a world where violence can manifest in various forms, T.J. Lane embodied the very essence of unbridled brutality. His attack was not merely an onslaught of fists, but a calculated and premeditated assault that would leave an indelible mark on the lives of his victims and their families. Lane's modus operandi was as chilling as it was deliberate. He donned a sweatshirt emblazoned with the word "killer" as he made his way to the school cafeteria, armed with a .22 caliber handgun. With a cold, calculating look, he began shooting at the unsuspecting students, causing chaos and death. The violence only stopped when a teacher and coach, displaying immense bravery, tackled Lane to the ground, putting an end to the rampage. The parents of Lane's victims spoke out with raw emotion, their voices filled with deep sorrow and fury. They made it clear that, if given the choice, they would see Lane endure a slow and agonizing death. They expressed that he didn't deserve to live while their children lay dead, victims of his selfish and cowardly actions. Their words came from a place of unbearable pain, as they felt that Lane had irreparably shattered their lives.
And I have enough memories to last me a lifetime. That child stole my baby's life.
Yet Lane seemed unmoved by their anguish. He sat in court, wearing a smug smirk, showing no hint of regret for the destruction he had caused. Even when it was revealed that he had proudly worn a shirt with the word killer on it, he remained indifferent, offering no remorse for his horrific deeds. In the end, Lane was given a very severe punishment. He was sentenced to 3 life sentences in prison, with no chance of parole. Quincy Tuttle. Our last case on the list involves the youngest accused, where his tender age stands in sharp opposition to the intense repercussions of his actions and the serious allegations levied against him. Quincy Tuttle, an 11-year-old 6th grader at Frontier Middle School in Vancouver, Washington, was arrested on October 23, 2013, after bringing a handgun, ammunition, and kitchen knives to school. He intended to use these weapons against a student who had bullied his friend. Tuttle's actions came to light when his mother reported her missing kitchen knives, suspecting her son had taken them. Probation officers, prosecutors, and psychologists expressed deep concern for public safety, urging that Tuttle remain in custody until a thorough mental health evaluation could be conducted. They were alarmed by his apparent risks to both himself and others, with one expert stating that the issues would not go away, and expressing concern that he posed a risk to both himself and others. In juvenile court, Commissioner Jennifer Snyder ruled that Tuttle should remain in custody due to concerns over safety, his volatile anger, and his family's dismissive attitude toward mental health advice. Tuttle, unbothered by the gravity of the situation, responded angrily, swearing at the commissioner and refusing to vacate the courtroom. It took forceful intervention from custody officers to remove him, as he defiantly yelled with vulgar words. Initially, Tuttle faced a litany of serious charges, including attempted assault, illegal possession of a firearm, and bringing a weapon onto school grounds. Later, prosecutors sought to add an attempted murder charge. However, in March 2014, when Tuttle was just 12 years old, he admitted to 2 counts of attempted assault, theft of a firearm, illegal possession of a firearm, and possession of a dangerous weapon at school. As part of a plea deal, the attempted murder charge was dropped. Judge Scott Collier sentenced the young defendant to 2 years in a juvenile detention center, followed by 2 years of probation, 40 hours of community service, and the potential obligation to contribute toward the victim's counseling expenses. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.